Every great regime in history has had an end. The Greeks, the Romans, the Mughals, and even the big British Empire. Each collapsed for a different reason. But one pattern repeats again and again: economic excess and loss of confidence. Which brings us to a difficult question. Will the American financial regime, dominant for nearly a century, also come to an end? And if you look at the US debt, the dollar, the recent gold price trend, and the global trade today, it's fair to ask, are we already seeing the early signs of the end? America's dominance isn't just military. Its real power comes from the US dollar. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, the currency of global trade, the ultimate safe haven. And all that gave the US a unique privilege: the ability to borrow massively, cheaply, and almost indefinitely. But we must not forget, reserve currencies survive on one thing above all, and that's trust. And that trust, I believe, is now being tested. Reserve currencies don't collapse because of rivals, they collapse because of internal excesses. And that brings me to the US debt. As of January 2026, the US national debt has surpassed a record of 38.5 trillion US dollars, driven by sustained federal budget deficits, with borrowing accelerating by approximately $8 billion every day. This debt now exceeds the nominal GDP of the country, and it imposes significant costs with annual interest payments in excess of $1 trillion. This is no longer a future problem. Interest payments alone are exploding and eating into government revenues. Even more concerning is that the debt is now rising at a rate faster than the GDP. This is not sustainable finance. That's just borrowing time. And the markets will eventually stop asking how big this debt is, and they will start asking how this problem will be dealt with. Now consider the US debt ceiling. It's been nothing short of a joke, in my opinion. Since its creation in 1939, it has been raised and revised over 100 times. Most recently, in year 2025, this limit was increased to 41 trillion. Every time the limit is hit, there is political drama, market panic, and then talk of discipline, and then another increase. A limit that is never enforced is not a limit, it's a practical joke. And while the US debates debt ceilings, the world, in my opinion, is slowly adjusting. Countries are settling trade in local currencies. BRICS nations are openly discussing non-dollar trade frameworks. Even emerging countries like Namibia have started talking about de-dollarization. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. All of this discussion is not anti-America. It's risk management. And when confidence wavers, this diversification will matter. Look at how the gold prices have surged recently. Historically, the gold prices rise when confidence in paper currency weakens, real interest rates turn negative, financial stress builds beneath the surface of the financial markets. Gold does not predict the dates of crisis. It signals fear and preparation, and I believe that the markets are clearly preparing for something big here. So that brings us to a question that how does this usually end? Well, history gives us several templates to work with, but none of them are, honestly speaking, any pleasant. One possible idea that comes about here is a possible high inflationary scenario in the next few years, like the one that happened in the United States in the 1970s, where high debt plus monetary expansion led to stagflation and real wealth being destroyed. Or there could be a financial repression, like in Britain post-World War II, where debt was managed by keeping interest rates really low, where the savers paid the price because inflation was very high. Or the government could cut down on their expenditures, which we call as austerity, like in the case in Southern Europe in 2010, which can possibly lead to high unemployment and social unrest. There could also be currency crisis, like in the case of emerging markets that has happened in the past. There could be even default or restructuring of the government debt, like in Argentina or Greece. See, when credibility is lost, restructuring becomes unavoidable. In my opinion, the most probable outcome out of all of this is a slow decline where there could be decades of underperformance, falling real incomes, and a declining global influence gradually. See, empires rarely collapse overnight. They fade, weighed down by their own debt and denial. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying today is not a prediction of a collapse tomorrow. This is not an anti-America argument either. It's a historical pattern. The US system is still very powerful. The dollar is still dominant, but the warning signs are no longer fringe ideas. They are visible in debt numbers, reserve shifts, gold prices, and even global trade behavior. So the real question is no longer whether the debt model faces a reckoning, but whether it will be managed gradually or forced violently by the markets. See, history is unforgiving for those who believe that this time it's different.